Big Séance Podcast, Episode 67, my coverage of the Haunted America Conference.
Welcome to the Big Séance Podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the Séance.
Welcome back, Paranerds. Today, we're taking a field trip. That's right, we're leaving the parlor for the Haunted America Conference. Yeah, actually, it's over. It was 2 weeks ago, but just go with it. Take your last potty break. It's just down the hall. But then jump on the station wagon, because we need to get going. But while people are pottying, I need to tell you that before the end of the episode, Tim Prossel has a new spectral edition for you, and I have a jam-packed segment of some really awesome listener feedback as well. Okay, is everybody ready? Here's the jump rope, everybody. Grab a hold. Did you guys ever have to hold on to the jump rope when you took field trips when you were little? I remember holding on to the jump rope. Okay, anyway, here we go. We're off to Alton, Illinois.
In 2 miles, take exit 31B onto MO 367 north toward Alton, Illinois.
Okay, so seriously, I was so very excited about this conference, and I'm very glad I went. As you may remember, this was my very first paranormal conference ever, if you can believe it. I've been to dozens of music teacher conferences, so I kind of knew what to expect, but that's a whole different kind of nerd right there. The coolest part of the conference was meeting people. I was finally able to officially meet Diane and Denise of the History Goes Bump podcast. Being in the same room with them was so very cool. I met Heather, who is a listener of the Big Séance, but she's also a big fan of History Goes Bump, along with Cindy, who was there with her sons. So I had a little crew to hang out with. I also talked quite a bit to a cool guy named Todd, who is a listener of the show and has a lot of experience with paranormal investigation. And you know what, Todd? I totally can't find your card. So if you hear this, make sure you contact me, okay? But obviously, another cool part of going to a paranormal conference is hearing and meeting speakers and personalities in the field. You're not supposed to record the speakers' sessions, so unfortunately I was not able to let you be a little mouse in my pocket for those moments. But like most conferences, they had an exhibit room where most of those folks hung out afterwards. But there was other interesting stuff in there too. Most of the conversations I captured for you come from inside this exhibit room. I did sign up for 2 after-hours events that weekend, and they were both late-night tours and investigations. I recorded quite a bit of those experiences, and it'll take me a while to go through that stuff. So that'll have to be a surprise for another episode in the future. But my evening at the famous McPike Mansion in particular was a very cool experience. I met some new friends and could have talked with them all evening. So more on all of that in a future episode. In this episode, you're going to hear from Barb Huyser, Sherri Brake of Haunted Heartland Tours, the artist Kari Bergen, Greg Newkirk of the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult, Steve Litteral of Tinker Swiss Cottage, Keith Age from the Sci-Fi and Chiller channels, and of course, Diane and Denise from History Goes Bump. So on Friday night, Troy Taylor welcomed everyone to the event, and it was clear from the get-go that this was a community he was speaking to. Many people have been coming and meeting at the conference for years. In fact, this summer's conference was the 20th conference that Troy has organized and put together. A really special moment was when he recognized a woman named Barb Huyser, who is the only person who has attended all 20 conferences. I got to talk to Barb, and I'll share that conversation a little later. So the history of the community and past conferences became the topic of the evening, and that was really neat to see. Troy played videos, people told stories of what paranormal investigation and being a paranerd was like in the early days before the big paranormal craze, before taps and ghost hunters, before REM pods and spirit boxes, and before there was a ghost hunting team on every block. And several of the stories were really funny. But clearly, this is a community that has grown and grown together. Like many conferences, they also opened with a speaker panel, giving each of the speakers and special guests a chance to introduce themselves and take a few questions. So along with the names I've already mentioned, we heard from Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Renee Cruz, Scotty Roberts, Alan Brown, Len Adams, and Luke Nalaborski, and the two ladies who I got to talk to but wasn't able to really track them down for an interview because they were so popular the whole weekend, and that's medium April Slaughter, who did a special evening seance that I was too late to sign up for, unfortunately, and a fascinating woman named Sarah Soderlund, sometimes known as Paranormal Sarah. We've actually tried to get connected for an interview for a few months now. So that was the speakers panel. Later on that first evening, Rosemary Ellen Guiley had her session on Black Mirror scrying, and then they had a masquerade ball, which was a wild night, I'm sure. I wouldn't know, because I elected to hang out for a few hours at the haunted McPike Mansion. More on that at another time. So I got back to my room very late and woke up bright and early to really check out the exhibits and talk to as many peeps as I could. I was very happy to run into Barb Huyser. She's the one who has been to every conference for 20 years.
So I heard last night in kind of the opening thing that you are, to their knowledge, the only person who has been here to the Haunted America Conference all 20 years. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
I look forward to it every year. This is my vacation.
Yeah.
All weird, all the time.
And I'm sure you've met some friends that you wouldn't have met without coming to these conferences.
Oh, sure. Renee and a bunch of the other guys, Len, we may not see each other except for the once a year when we come to the conference.
So you're kind of a celebrity here, I guess. Know everyone.
Well, I know a few people. Yeah, and I've presented a couple of times.
Yeah.
So, yes. Yeah, I have a good time.
Any experiences that stick out from 20 years?
Well, there was the year back when we were at the History and Hauntings bookstore. There was one weekend conference where the ghost at the bookstore was throwing books off the shelves.
Oh my gosh.
One of which landed on my head. And so that was pretty good. The things I remember most, though, are, especially back in the early days, this was the place that we came to find out what was going on with technology. The internet was not available.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as YouTube. And so the first time any of us saw video that had been taken with night shot technology
wow.
was here. The first time Renee was working with a family that had poltergeist activity. She showed the video where she caught the son of the family faking it. So there were all kinds of things that this was the place that we came to learn how to do it. Yeah. The first time I ever saw a ghost box operated was here. So it is a bit less of that now, simply because YouTube is out there and there's just so much more information available via the internet. But in terms of actually getting together with people who are investigating and just spending time swapping stories.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's things you don't necessarily tell the civilian population on a YouTube video. Yeah, so this is really a very special networking event, too. Yeah.
I'm honored to meet you. This is very cool.
I'm
This is Barb, by the way. I didn't say your name.
I'm Barb Huyser of Monmouth, Illinois, founder and lead investigator and paranormal social worker for the Small Town Ghosts team.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Doesn't that make you feel good? Barb is also the founder of the Small Town Ghosts team, and they cover western Illinois and eastern Iowa. She has been investigating the paranormal since 1977. That's a year before I was born, y'all. With nearly 40 years of experiences, I might find myself calling on Barb again soon. Well, I stopped the recording after that brief interview. That, it turns out, was a mistake because we continued our conversation for a few minutes. She shared a few stories of her experiences, and she was kind enough to tell me that by walking around like a nerd at the conference with a microphone, which was making me feel a little self-conscious, I was playing an important role by passing on the work and funneling the information out to the world. Thanks, Barb. Next up on the exhibit room tour, Sherri Brake.
So this is Sherri Brake, and I heard her talk last night at the opening thing, and she had some really cool things to say, and I kind of accused her of being a psychic medium when I got in here this morning, and I learned she's not, but here she is, and she can tell us all about what she does.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. My name is Sherri Brake. I've got 7 published books. I love haunted history. Almost 15 years ago, I started a company called Haunted Heartland Tours. And what I do is I operate in 5 states, and I also do trips to Ireland and Scotland. I find some of the most intriguing buildings with haunted history, dark history. I rent them out. Many of them are overnight ghost hunts. We also do events in Gettysburg. So we travel around and invite people to come out and investigate with us. Some of the locations that we do include places like the Ohio State Reformatory, the West Virginia Penitentiary, Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, the USS North Carolina, which is in Wilmington, North Carolina, cool place. And I also have a couple events in July and August at Waverly Hills, which of course is in Louisville, Kentucky.
So you're not easily spooked?
I'm not. I have been doing investigations for almost 30 years.
Yeah.
So I'm on the other side of 50. I started in my 20s.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I survived. That was the scariest thing in my life, right? Turning 50. No, but it's been wonderful. I am a open-minded skeptic. I don't believe everything that people tell me because people will tell you anything. I have to investigate it for myself. So I am not going to take anybody to a location that doesn't meet my standards. So I love it. I love what I do. Meet some fascinating people. I get to meet you, and I get to travel around. So it's a win-win situation. And I love educating people as well, not only on the paranormal, but also on history itself. And I base everything that I do on research. Absolutely love it.
I think history is creeping into the paranormal a little more. I think that's about time that it's done that.
Yeah, it has to. And that's why my website is hauntedhistory.net. So haunted history is the foundation for everything that I do. You've got to do the research. You've got to find the documented murders, the suicides, the battles, the names of the inmates if you're in a prison, the names of the patients at the asylum. So all that helps you not only so that you can absorb and learn why this location might be haunted, but also to help you in your investigation with maybe doing EVPs. Mm-hmm. That helps you with your EVP session. If you've got the name of the inmates and what cell they sat in, chances are that's really going to bring you a better capture than if you didn't have any information at all.
What's maybe your most recent book that you have going on now?
Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. It's the haunted history of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which is a mouthful.
Oh, yeah.
It's a mouthful.
And probably fun to type 1,000 times, too.
Yeah, really. TALA. T-A-L-A. You find ways to abbreviate, Yeah. And but that was my last one. I've got hopefully 2 more coming out this year. I just got to be home long enough to wrap them up.
Great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Sherri was one of the speakers for the conference, and she talked about some of the horrors of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Next up is an artist named Kari Bergen. I immediately knew that I needed to connect her with our friend Josiel Lorenzo.
So you've got an awesome table of artwork here, and we've been talking for a few minutes. So tell us your name and kind of about your work. And you said this was your first time having a table anywhere, and it was kind of a cool experience.
My name is Kari Bergen, and I've been attending the Haunted America Conference since 2003, but this is my first year with the table, and I'm selling my art, which is a lot of mixed media assemblage, shadow boxes. I really like to get inspired by antique and vintage pieces. I try to repurpose or use old pieces as much as possible rather than buying new components. And since I run an antique and vintage ephemera shop on Etsy, I end up acquiring a lot of interesting materials that aren't necessarily in the best condition for selling, but they're still really interesting, and I like to sort of elevate those pieces by putting them into my art.
Cool. Where do you find that site?
Oh, my site is Ephemera Obscura at Etsy.
Okay. You rock. Thank you.
Thank you.
The link to Kari's Etsy shop will be in the show notes at bigseance.com. The main exhibit this year at the conference is something you couldn't miss if you tried. But considering what was on display, I think some people may have been doing their best to try to avoid it. The exhibit was the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. And here's Greg Newkirk, the director of the museum.
Museum, I heard your talk last night, which really kind of piqued my interest, and so I wanted to know more. What do you have here?
We've got a selection of all kinds of stuff. We have allegedly haunted items, allegedly cursed items, and then just some items of paranormal note. And we've been collecting stuff for almost 20 years now, but we've only really been doing this museum publicly for about 3. It's something that kind of just started as a fluke. We had a booth at an event. We were giving a talk about how to get abducted by aliens, and they gave us a booth. We didn't have anything to sell, but we had all this neat stuff we collected. So we're like, yeah, people never have a chance to see this stuff up close and to hold stuff that's supposed to be haunted and investigate it themselves. And so we tried a very small version of this, and people loved it. People thought it was great, and so we were like, okay, let's keep doing this. Let's build on this. And now people are sending us their stuff. We've got a post office box just for it. Stuff shows up in it all the time. We're always rotating the collection. So we've got like a plank from the Amityville Horror House.
Oh my gosh!
We've got Cliff Berkman from Finding Bigfoot just donated us an Orang Pendek cast. He funds an expedition in search of the Orang Pendek in Sumatra. Patrick Doyle from Ghost Mine just sent us an actual piece of the haunted Crescent Mine from Oregon and an old mine drill. And apparently it's got some strange phenomena attached to it, moves around on its own. He said, I'll let you guys get creeped out by it for a while. We've got...
what was you were talking about the creepiest thing that you have that you won't let people touch last night?
It's the crone, and she's this gal in a box over here. And we keep her in a box that's locked because we're not exactly sure what her purpose was. And because of that, we're kind of weird about people touching her because we don't know what is attached to it. All we know is that a couple guys found it in a cave in the middle of the Catskills and decided to take it home. Terrible idea, by the way. and as you can imagine, almost immediately they started experiencing strange poltergeist phenomena. It would move from room to room on its own. The scariest thing was they started to see some wet footprints that would show up. They'd smell mud. And then eventually what ended it and then them said what made them go, we can't have this anymore, was they saw this entity that looked like an old woman, and she was stark naked, dripping wet, and she just kind of turns and looks at them. Their dog wets itself, won't go in the house anymore. So they actually ended up doing, they went to Reddit and did a Reddit thread and said, what do we do with this thing? What do we do with this thing? And of course, the answer everyone says is, take it back. Go put it back in the cave. They refused to go back to the cave. In a weird serendipitous moment, a guy that we had we did the season premiere of Finding Bigfoot, looking for Bigfoot as a ghost and not a flesh and blood creature. He'd heard this PA had heard all about our museum because we'd spent 2 weeks in a van with him. And he said, I was reading about this thing in the van on another shoot, and I said, I know exactly who you got to contact. So we get an email from this guy, and he says, what do I do? And I said what everybody else said. I said, take it back and apologize. He said, to who? And I just said, in general. Just apologize in general. And he said, we're too afraid of meeting the people who put it there. We're too scared that we won't find it. I don't want to do that. And so they sent it to us. And immediately, stuff started happening. Oh, I know, right? Hey, we're used to hearing, it's your problem now, is what, those are the magic words. And immediately, I mean, it pulled Jesus off of a crucifix, threw it across the room. We captured it on camera, moving by itself. And the worst thing so far is we did get the wet footprints. We walked into the living room one day. I have this really hysterical photo of Dana, and I'll have to post it online, sitting on the couch, looking like she's going to cry because there's wet footprints that have walked across the couch. So that's about as crazy as it's gotten for us so far. We've had it under surveillance. We have a 24/7 live streaming web camera that anyone can log into. There's a chat room there. And we've gotten, like, motion alerts. People have sent us timestamps. We've gone back. It's actually, like, pushed things off of it. So she's under constant surveillance to see exactly what the deal is.
So what's that website?
It's paramuseum.com. And there's little write-ups about the histories of most of the objects. We're adding to it all the time. And it's got the 24/7 live cam there. There's a chat room. People are just constantly hanging out and looking for weird stuff.
Isn't that cool? And I love that they have a live feed at their site. While you're there, you can see some of the footage of the mysterious crone that he was talking about. And I want to take a moment here to fill you in on a story that Troy Taylor shared online recently after the conference wrapped up. Apparently, there was a strange encounter with a haunted doll named Ruby, who was on display with the other items with the traveling museum. Here's what Troy said. Strange things happen at the Haunted America Conference, especially when the Planet Weird Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult is involved. Even though she never touched, handled, or photographed any of the objects from the museum, my partner in crime, Lisa Taylor Horton, ended up with an unwanted souvenir from the museum. On Saturday night, Sunday morning, long after the conference had ended and the museum had been packed away, a very strange event occurred. Following the ghosts of the River Road dinner tour, Lisa forgot her phone in her room for this one, and the late evening seance and cocktails with friends, Lisa plugged her phone in and went to sleep. It was a little after 2:00 a.m. The next morning, Lisa checked out and started for home, but we stopped along the way for lunch. That's when she noticed that her phone was almost dead, even though it had been plugged in all night. And that's when she looked at the photos on her phone. The latest photo was the weird one. It was a photo of Ruby, a doll and one of the artifacts in the museum. A couple of problems, though. The timestamp on the photo was 2:46 a.m., and stranger, Lisa didn't take the photo. She was asleep at the time, and Ruby had been packed away hours earlier. What happened? We don't know. So far, there is no logical explanation for what occurred, or at least we haven't come up with it yet. All that I can say is that if you've ever wondered about the authenticity of the objects in the museum, I think you can stop. You can find a screenshot of that photo from Lisa's phone on the Facebook page of the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. I really recommend that you like that page. I've been following it recently, and it's been very interesting. Okay, back to the exhibit room. When I ran into Steve Litteral from the Tinker Swiss Cottage in Rockford, Illinois, he was telling me about how they were featured in a ghost hunters investigation on Sci-Fi a few years ago. At the time, I couldn't remember the episode or anything about the cottage. Once I looked it up, though, I remembered that this was one of my favorite episodes. More than anything, I was blown away by the absolutely beautiful woodwork and the craftsmanship of the interior. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you have got to check it out.
At the Haunted America Conference.
Hi, my name is Steve Litteral, and I'm the Executive Director at Tinker Swiss Cottage Museum in Rockford, Illinois. and we're a Victorian cottage. It's got all original furniture. It's a Victorian mansion, but it looks like a Swiss chalet, and it's up on a bluff, and we're like in a 5-acre park. Even though it's in the middle of town, we look like we're in the country because it's a 5-acre park, and we're surrounded by woods and stuff like that. We have a barn. I mean, like I said, it's in the middle of town now, but back then we were on the edge of town, and it was still a farm. And so basically we're like a little farmstead in the middle of a city. Last year we had our 150th anniversary. It was built in 1865 by a guy named Robert Tinker. And so it's, we have a lot of... I've been there for 8 years, and we've been doing paranormal stuff for about 7 now. And we had Taps, the ghost hunters were there, in the summer of 2012. And it's been a real fun experience.
Very cool. Did you already give me did you say a website?
No, it's tinkercottage.com.
Man, what a cool place to be able to work and spend your time in. Seriously, do a simple Google image search for Tinker Swiss Cottage. There's a spiral staircase there that'll blow your mind. So when you float around a conference with a microphone like this, you put yourself at risk of interviewing someone you might not recognize, but probably should recognize. Maybe I'm not the paranerd I thought I was. So you can hear my embarrassed response after this person introduced himself.
All right, so tell us who you are and what you're doing here at the Haunted America Conference.
My name is Keith Age. I am the host of the Spook series on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Oh, my gosh.
Last time I was here was 10 years ago. Troy and I have been friends since the late 80s. So we go way back. Back when it was not cool to ghost hunt. My friend, I was the very first American Ghost Society Kentucky rep for Troy. So that's a long time ago. And it's been 10 years since I've been here and it's been busy.
Very cool. Now, I didn't know the show, but I know I probably now have listeners all over that tell us about the show.
See all the shows? Me and the Booth Brothers do the documentary sci-fi movies for sci-fi. Not sci-fi, excuse me, supernatural. And they're based on true events when we find them. And supernatural. And we're on Sci-Fi and Chiller Channel. And if not, you can find us all over the internet. So
I need to watch more TV.
It's like I need more cowbell. No. They're either both about the same.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You rock.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'll check it out. I feel out of the loop now.
So I have some homework now and some documentaries to catch up on. I'll put some links for Keith in the show notes. So all of these conversations happened on the second day of the conference. The exhibit room was buzzing the whole weekend, but the main room is where the speakers presented to a packed audience of paranerds. Alan Brown had a presentation about haunted bed and breakfasts. Scotty Roberts talked about his paranormal adventures in Egypt. Rosemary Ellen Guiley talked about the jinn, shadow people, ETs, and the black-eyed people phenomenon, very similar to the episode that she had here on the Big Séance. Sherri Brake had her talk on the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Luke Nalaborski, who did a great job leading one of the tours and investigations I went on later that evening, he talked about strange stuff. No, really, that's what it's called. Troy Taylor came back with Renee Cruz to talk about some of their experiences on the paranormal. And then I mentioned earlier trying to set up an interview with Sarah Soderlund. My gosh, her talk was so very interesting. I really resonated with what she had to say, and she's so real and hilarious. She is a forensic psychologist who studies neuro-linguistic programming, profiling, and also specializes in psychopathy. How often do you hear that? So she talked about the psychology of the paranormal. Now that's interesting. And I just started reading her book, Haunted by the Abyss, and I'm loving it. I do hope that someday I'll get her for an interview because I think you would love it. Saturday evening, I was getting ready to check out and head to my last event for the weekend, an investigation of a haunted nearby church. And I was saying my goodbyes to Diane and Denise of History Goes Bump. And I realized I hadn't captured their voices at the conference yet. So here you go.
Okay, so this is actually the end of the Haunted America Conference. And we almost had the History Goes Bump ladies sneak out of here without me recording their voices. I've been hanging out with them the whole time. So let's see what you guys thought about this whole event. I'm pretty tired, but I had fun. What do you think?
Patrick, we had a great time, and I would have to say the highlight was actually getting to meet you. You know, we've been hearing your voice now for, months and probably a year.
Yeah, at least a year.
At least a year. And so it was so cool to get to meet you in person.
Yeah. And meet a lot of the spooktacular crew, too. We've got Heather here, and we've got some Cindy here. Denise, what do you think about the conference?
I think it was amazing. I really, really enjoyed all the speakers. I had a great time meeting people. That was my favorite part, is just getting to meet you and people face to face, because I'm definitely a people person, so that was awesome.
Plenty of time to talk here, and now we're sitting here looking at the weather because Diane and Denise have a tour that they're getting ready to take, maybe in the rain. So,
Patrick, what's more creepy than a thunderstorm during a ghost tour, right?
True, and I'm going to do a ghost hunt in maybe a storm at a church, so we'll see about that.
And you know what? Finally meeting Diane and Denise, running into listeners of the podcast, and making new friends really was the coolest part of the conference. And sometime in the future, I hope to share more about those late night tours and investigations in a separate episode, so stay tuned for that.
You're listening to the Big Séance Podcast with Patrick Keller. Look for us on iTunes and be sure to check out bigseance.com for more discussion.
Welcome to the audio version of Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. I have 2 articles this time. They fit together thematically. They're kind of 2 sides to the same coin, but this shows you the effect that ghosts can have on actual marriages. I've been debating which one to start with. I guess I'll go with first the wedding and then the marriage. The first one comes from the Princeton Union, which is a newspaper from Minnesota. It was published on March 12th of 1891. The headline is Her Mother's Ghost. A marriage which was to have taken place at Camden the other night was interrupted in an unexpected way. The contracting parties, Henry Brown and Miss Mary Morgan, stood before Reverend Mr. Clayton preparatory to becoming man and wife. A portion of the service had been already read, about 50 witnesses being present, when the bride uttered a loud scream. All eyes were immediately fixed upon her. She was seen to raise her hand and to point toward a corner of the church. The next moment she fell on the floor in a swoon and had to be carried out. Physicians worked with her for nearly an hour before she was restored to consciousness. When fully recovered, she gave a curious explanation of her conduct. Her mother, who died 4 months ago, was opposed to her marriage with Brown. The marriage was for a time delayed, but after Mrs. Morgan's death, arrangements for it were pushed. Miss Morgan says that just when she was about to pronounce the binding words, she raised her eyes and saw her mother's ghost. Then she fainted. The wedding was postponed for several days. The next article, maybe it's the next phase, was published on April 10th of 1889 in the Columbus Journal, Columbus, Nebraska. And the title is An Alabama Ghost. A ghost has caused a divorce suit and broken up a once happy family in Blount County, Alabama. About 5 years ago, James Martin married a Miss Noel, one of the belles of the county. The young couple went to live at the old Martin home, and all went well until about a year ago. Mrs. Martin, naturally very timid, heard a ghost rambling through the old house one night and was badly frightened. She told her husband about it, but he could hear nothing, he said. From that time it became a nightly visitor at the Martin home. Mrs. Martin wanted to leave the old house at once, but her husband objected, declaring the strange noises heard were made by rats. Several times Mrs. Martin, so she says, saw a white-robed figure wandering through the old house, and soon her nerves and health began to give way under the strain. She was finally prostrated by her fear of her ghost, and went to the home of her parents to recover her health and strength. Fear of the ghost overcame love of husband, and Mrs. Martin refused to live with him again. Martin tried in vain to induce his wife to return to the haunted house to live, but she refused, and he filed a suit for divorce on the ground of abandonment. Boy, isn't marriage tough enough without a ghost? This has been Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. I have almost 300 of these ghost reports. They're actual articles from U.S. newspapers published between 1865 and 1918. I post one each Wednesday on my website. That website is called The Merry Ghost Hunter. I hope you stop by.
Thanks for joining us for the Big Séance podcast. We'd better get back to the table while there's still some candlelight left.
I got a nice email this week. I'm going to go ahead and not read their name to protect their privacy, but the email reads, Patrick, I needed to write to let you know how much I am enjoying your podcast. I have recently found it when searching through Stitcher and have been enjoying the sessions I have heard so far. What brought me to you is I listened to a podcast called Seek Reality by Roberta Grimes. She is an afterlife researcher who has written some great books on after-death communications. I have recently had a reawakening of this subject because I suddenly lost my husband last December due to a heart attack. In the wake of his passing, I have had some very interesting and amazing things happen that have led to wanting to find out more about the afterlife and communication with our loved ones that have passed over. I have had several experiences in the past 6 months, one of which was witnessed by several other people, that have forced me to rethink that life does go on after our bodies give out, and that two-way communication with our loved ones is possible. There are so many experiences I have had, but more than a few have stood out to me that cannot be attributed to anything less than my husband is still with me every day. Which brings me to my next point. In devouring the research on afterlife and after-death communications, or ADC, I have found a very interesting project that is currently going on. I'm not sure if you have heard about Dr. Craig Hogan and his work with what they call the North American Station. This project is an ongoing attempt at communicating with those in spirit through the means of electronics. This is different than a typical EVP session because they are specifically requesting and receiving communications with specific people in the spirit with very good results. This station is modeled after the Brazilian station that was Sonia Rinaldi, who has had success in reuniting grieving parents with their children in spirit. Here is a link, and I'll put that in the show notes. Craig also does self-guided courses on communications with loved ones that I have started to work with that have allowed me to see my husband, my father, mother, and aunt who have all passed. I believe that these courses have allowed me to open a door that has allowed my husband to visit me during my sleep. I have had 3 such visits, one of which left behind physical evidence. Anyway, I wanted to reach out to you and let you know that I am so much enjoying your work and also share with you some of the research I have found that might interest you. This world of the paranormal is an interesting one, and once you start looking into it, you start to realize just how big it is. It has started me down the road of quantum physics. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts. Thank you so much for that email. It takes me back to a point in time where I was reading so much about the current ITC and EVP research going on. I think I'm going to let you keep track of the quantum physics, though, because that goes over my head. I'm definitely going to check the things you mentioned further. And you know what? This isn't the first listener to contact me and mention Roberta Grimes. Since this email, I've been listening to her podcast, Seek Reality, and I just received a book she wrote called The Fun of Dying. I look forward to reading it. I was excited to get not 1, but 2 pieces of voice feedback this week. One used the hotline, which is mentioned every episode in the outro. That's 775-583-5555. 775563. Or you could just think 7755 tell me. The second piece of voice feedback came from someone who used the SpeakPipe Link, which is very easy to use. If it makes things easier, if you're wanting to contact me or leave your own voice feedback, all you have to do is go to bigseance.com/contact to find out more. So here we go. First up, a guitar player who sees himself play a particular song in a dream and then can wake up and play it. It's very interesting. It reminds me of one of the dreams I had where my brain composed a kind of film score for my dream, and I woke up singing it. I didn't get a name from the person who left the feedback, but I want to thank them for calling in.
So I was just listening to your show, 30-minute podcast on your page about being able to read what you see in your dreams, but I don't believe I've ever had that, but I think it's relevant to state that just last night and multiple times before, well, first off, I play the guitar, so I've been able to see myself playing something and then actually bring it out into the real world and play that exact tune. But I also play by ear. I don't know theory or scales, really. I just play by ear. So if I hear it in my dream, I can play it. And that's happened to me on multiple occasions. So I thought that was relevant to let you know about. Okay, thank you.
And here's the other piece of feedback. Again, no name, but you can hear that they were listening to my interview with Guy Lyon Playfair as he discusses the Enfield poltergeist case.
And Lorraine was very harmless.
Is that doll on the movie an actual Raggedy Ann doll?
So this is a good question, and if I understand it correctly, they're referring to either the first Conjuring movie, where the doll, Annabelle, is introduced. The story of Annabelle the doll is another one of the cases from Ed and Lorraine Warren that goes back to, I think, 1970. And of course, that scene with the doll in the first Conjuring was planned perfectly to be able to spin off into a separate movie called Annabelle, and apparently an upcoming Annabelle 2. But to answer your question, the real Annabelle doll was a Raggedy Ann doll, and there are several photos of her online, and she still resides in Lorraine Warren's occult museum at her house. The doll in the recent films is not a Raggedy Ann doll, but a more typical doll with realistic hair and strange eyes. Very creepy. And on that note, I'm out of here because guess what? I'm off to bite my tongue and finally catch the Conjuring 2 film. Actually, I'm sure as a movie and form of entertainment, I'll love it, just as I did the first Conjuring. On the next episode, we'll talk to Tim Stevens, an independent film director with a new short film just perfect for the Paranerd. Peace out.
For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. Just click on the Big Seance podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and we've just been added to the Google Play Music Store. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line at 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.